Welcome back to Easily Explained, where today we will be talking about inverse functions. So let's get started. An inverse function is a function that interchanges the independent and dependent variables of another function. So basically, it's interchanging the x and y variables of another function. So in a normal function, when we're given x, the domain, and y, the range always depends on the domain. Now we are going to switch the variables. Basically, we always solved for y when x was given. Now we're going to solve for x when y is given in the inverse functions. So the inverse function notation is as shown below, but remember when you read it out loud, you're not going to say f to the negative 1 power x. That's not what this means. This itself is the inverse function notation, so when you read it, you say f inverse of x, and then is equal to the rest of the function. Now let's go over the steps to write an inverse function. The first step is to rewrite the function replacing f of x with y. So if we're given the function f of x is equal to 2x plus 3, after doing step 1, y is equal to 2x plus 3. So in this case, we're just replacing f of x with y. F of x replaced with y. That's the very first step. Step 2 is to switch x with y. So from the last step, we have y is equal to 2x plus 3. And now we're going to switch x and y. So x is equal to 2y plus 3. Next, we're going to solve for y in terms of x. And this is from this equation that we have now in step 2. So this is where our literal equations come into play. So make sure to go revisit the literal equations video so that you get a better understanding on how to do some more complex ones. The main idea is pretty simple though. Here's our main equation. We want to solve it in terms of y, so y equals something. And remember that it's from to where we already switched it. So if you were thinking about it in terms of this one, you don't want to overcomplicate it, but basically you're solving for x since we switched x and y. But we won't overcomplicate it. We are just going to solve for y. First step is to subtract 3 on either side. So now it's x minus 3 equals 2y, and then we're going to divide by 2 on either side. And remember, when you divide by 2, it's dividing both terms, and we can split it up and say half x minus 3 over 2. Where did the 1 come from? Well, if you think about it, 1x is equal to x. So half x minus 3 over 2 is equal to y. So now we have solved for y. And the very last step is just replacing y with f inverse of x. So from this equation, just replace the y. F inverse of x is equal to half x minus 3 over 2 is the inverse of our original equation. F of x is equal to 2x plus 3. Basically, all we did is solve for x and just switch the notation. I just did a little bit more step by step so that it's easier and you don't get confused, you can just switch it in the first place. But this is very important. Inverse functions can only apply to one-to-one functions. What do I mean by that? This is when each domain has one range and if you remember, that is the definition of the function itself, so it has to have that. But on top of that, each range can only have one domain. Basically, if you were to graph, the function has to pass the vertical line test, like it did for it to be a function at all. But now it also has to pass the horizontal test, which means that no one line can go through two different horizontal lines. So it has to pass both vertical and horizontal tests, which means it has one domain and one range. Now it's time for your practice. So for each of the functions that are given, you want to find the inverse of the function by going through the steps that we just went over. As a reminder, we have number 1, write the function replacing f of x with y. Number 2, you're going to switch the x with y. Then you're going to solve for y in terms of x. And then you're going to replace y with the function notation, f inverse of x. Please do not read it. Again, as f to the negative 1 power, because that's not what it means. So we are going to pause the video and complete the practice, and then we'll meet together and go over it together. All right, number 1, f of x is equal to 3x plus 6. All right, so step number 1 is how to replace the f of x with y. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take this part out, say y is equal to 3x plus 6. That was step number 1. And now from here, we're going to switch x and y. X is equal to 3y plus 6. All right, third step is the kind of lengthier step. It's just when we solve for y. So we're going to subtract x minus 6 equals to 3y, and then we're going to isolate the variable by dividing either side by 3. So we get 1/3 x again. Think of the invisible 1 before the x so that you're able to write a common fraction. And then minus 6 over 3, which we can simplify to just 2, is equal to y. And now the very last part is to switch y with inverse function notation. F inverse of x is equal to 1/3 x minus 2. So that should be your answer. And we're going to do the same thing for the next problem. Number 1 step, the first step, y is equal to 2x plus 14. We replaced the f of x with y. Then we are going to switch the variables. X is equal to 2y plus 14. 3, we are just going to solve for y. Subtract x minus 14 equals 2y. Divide both sides by 2, we get half x minus 7 equals y, and last we're just going to replace y. And that's our final answer. We're going to do the exact same thing for number 3. Solve for y now. And then just write the correct function, inverse function notation. And the very last problem is no different. Our final answer is just f inverse of x is equal to 1/5 x plus 2. Congratulations, you are now an expert at inverse functions. If this video helped, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye!